Hey everybody, it's Josh Collacchi here, back on RotoCurve with today's starting pitchers picks. I want to talk about today's slate, which it is an 8-game slate. It's a split slate. Actually, we have one going on right now with some decent pitchers in the early slate, but the late slate's going to be tough. But before we get into that, I want to talk about last night's pitchers. Great, Joe Ross was a great value. I mean, he really pitched pretty well. The only issue with him is at the very end, he gave up a two-run single to, I can't remember who it was, but the Mets ended up winning that game. So his counterpart actually pitched very well, Jacob deGrom. He was able to be the stopper that the Mets needed after a few losses in a row. But between deGrom and Ross, both of them exceeded their value, and Ross was actually one of the better values at his price. The other guy we talked about yesterday was Chris Heston, and he was excellent as well. We talked about how the fact that he's very good at home, and he did pitch on the road yesterday in Petco, but it's a very similar ballpark, and he pitched very well, taking a no-hitter, I believe, to the fifth inning. He only gave up 1 or 2 hits. He went 7 1/3, 6 strikeouts, and got the win. So he definitely exceeded expectations, was exactly what we were looking for him. And those of them that had him ended up doing well. I think he was one of the pitchers and the guys that finished top in the GPPs yesterday. The other guy I mentioned to use in cash games, if you did play cash last night, was Michael Wacha, and he did pitch well. He gave up more runs than you would have liked to see, but he had those strikeout numbers up, which was good to see. Able to get him, I believe, over 17 on DraftKings and close to 14 or 15 on FanDuel, which is exactly what you want out of a guy like that. Just a nice solid points in the middle of the teens and get your team over the hump in those cash games. The other guy we discussed was Carlos Rodon, and he was not good last night. He did have a lot of strikeouts early, but he gave up a grand slam to Matt Holliday that really killed his night, and he didn't finish above 0 on DraftKings, and I don't remember exactly what his point total on FanDuel was either, but he didn't do too well last night, and it's one of the first times the Cardinals actually hit a left-handed pitcher. And you got to keep that in mind going forward with Matt Holliday, who I'm not sure if he'll play today, coming off injury, but he is back in that lineup, and he did some damage last night against a left-handed pitcher. But the one last guy that we talked about was Brett Anderson, and he got injured in the second inning, so he really wasn't able to complete his effort. It's tough to see, and hopefully he'll be okay for his next start. Now, with that being said, let's get into today's slate. There's 8 games today, as we mentioned earlier. Now, normally with an 8-game slate, you have a few good options and a lot of bad options, especially in the middle of the week like Wednesday. And that's what we have today. We have 3 aces: Sonny Gray against the Toronto Blue Jays, Jose Fernandez against the Arizona Diamondbacks, and Lance Lynn against the White Sox. Of these 3, my top option is Lance Lynn, especially in cash games. If you're playing cash tonight, I will probably have him in every cash lineup and most of my tournament lineups as well, as he just has the best lineup, or the best matchup, rather, against these White Sox. We talk about with the White Sox and how they're a great matchup for left-handed pitchers, but lately they've been good matchup for right-handed pitchers as well. That offense is really stagnant. They haven't been able to put much together, and they can't really hit the ball out of the ballpark with the exception of Jose Abreu. So that makes Lynn my top option for today. Now, those other 2 aces are excellent pitchers. You talk about Sonny Gray, but he does face Toronto. Toronto is a very good offense. They have been struggling relatively of late, but it's tough to start a guy that costs that much against an offense that can light up at any time. The other guy we just discussed was Jose Fernandez. Now, Fernandez is a different pitcher on the road. He's still very good. He's still very talented, but when he's at home, he's just flat out dominant. And today he goes on the road to face the Diamondbacks in Chase Field, which is one of the better hitting ballparks in the game. So for a guy like Fernandez costing as much as he does against a lineup that hits pretty well in a hitter's ballpark, it might be tough for me to pay up for him, especially in cash games. Now, considering his ability, I'll probably have him in a tournament or 2, but I just can't go with him or Gray over Lance Lynn, especially given Lynn's matchup and his success of late. There are some cheap guys that I like today, and some of these names might make you cringe. They made me cringe, but with the lack of cheap pitchers today, there really isn't much to look at. Other than those 3 aces, there really aren't too many other pitchers that can possibly fit into your lineups and make you comfortable. But the 2 cheap guys that I may take flyers on today, the first one is Joe Kelly against the Astros. Kelly was called up a few days ago, and he's going to start for the Red Sox tonight against the Astros, as I mentioned. And when you look at Joe Kelly, you've seen him pitch. It doesn't quite make sense, and what I mean by that is he has excellent stuff, but it's confusing to watch because he doesn't strike out a lot of hitters, and you wonder why, because he has a fastball that goes in the 90s and runs to the left or to the right of different hitters, and it's a good slider. There's a lot of movement on his pitchers, but he just can't seem to put it all together, and that's why he's been a very inconsistent option. But the reason why I do like him is because he faces the Astros, who strike out the most in baseball. Against left-handed pitching, against right-handed pitching. They just strike out a lot, and that's how their offense is built. They have a lot of home runs, but they also have a lot of strikeouts. And I think that's one reason why I like Kelly today, because he does have good stuff. And if he happens to put it together, he has a chance to really run that fantasy point total up. And he will be very low owned because he's not that good of a pitcher. But the fact remains, against a team like the Astros, they always have the upside to score a lot of points. And that's the one reason why I would target him. The other guy I like, and it's going to pain me to say this, for those of you that know me, I'm not a big fan of this guy, but John Danks against the Cardinals. He actually had a very good matchup. Now, Danks is one of the worst left-handed pitchers in baseball. I can't deny that. But he has a good matchup, and it's hard to discount that, especially today with the lack of good pitchers. Now, you heard me talk about left-handed pitchers against the Cardinals before. I mentioned earlier in this video. And with Matt Holliday back, it makes that lineup a little bit better. But if he sits tonight, it's the rest of that lineup that really cannot hit left-handed pitching. And Dank could possibly be an option. We talked about how bad Cardinals have been with the exception of Matt Holliday against left-handed pitching. They strike out a ton, and they did just like last night, but they did score some runs. But they do strike out a lot. They do have a lot of left-handed bats in that lineup that struggle against lefties. And although Danks is not a good pitcher, listen to this. He has 3 starts in his last 8 where he's absolutely dominated 3 good offenses. He shut out the Royals. He shut out the Orioles, who hit left-handed pitching very well, and he shut out the Astros, who also hit left-handed pitching very well. Now the Correa is up and Altuve is healthy. It's weird because you look at a guy like that and you think, oh, this is a great matchup for me. A lot of people stacked the Royals against him. They stacked Orioles against him, and they stacked Astros, and he shut out all 3 times. So tonight might be a night that a lot of people will stack those Cardinals, but he has a knack for throwing a gem when you really don't expect it. So tonight could be that night, and he actually has a good matchup on paper. So that's just Joe Kelly and John Danks are the 2 cheap options that I do like today, strictly in tournaments. I do not play those guys in cash because they're not very good pitchers and they have the tendency to give up a lot of runs. But sometimes in the tournaments, you're going to have to take risks, and I think these 2 risks might be worth it today. As for the guys that I will have, like I said earlier, I'm going to have a lot of Lance Lynn. I'm not probably going to be playing cash on 2-pitcher sites like DraftKings and Fantasy Aces because I'm not technically comfortable with my second pitching option. But on 1-pitcher sites like FanDuel, I'm very comfortable with Lynn in cash, and I think he will be very highly owned. But it's worth taking him in these cash games because he's not as expensive as some of the other pitchers, but he will allow you to fit some of the bats that you need, especially with some of the cheaper bats on FanDuel. So I like Lance Lynn everywhere, and I will be mixing him on 2-pitcher sites and tournament lineups with Jose Fernandez, with Sonny Gray a little bit despite their matchups, and I'll have some Joe Kelly and John Danks mixed in with Lynn as well. So I will have all of Lance Lynn tonight. I will have a lot of Jose Fernandez given his ability, and hopefully John Danks and Joe Kelly can put up a nice performance tonight at a low-owned tournament pitcher. That brings us to the end of our pitching segment today, rather. Be sure to check out RotoCurve's lineup page later to see what lineups have come out. Maybe there's some hitters that are out. For me personally, I'm going to be looking at Matt Holliday. If he's out, Danks is my guy in tournaments. And be sure to keep an eye on the weather. Danielle does a great job every day discussing which games could be postponed, could not be postponed, and maybe if there's a long rain delay, which means you would stay away from those pitchers. So among that and all the rest of the tools here at RotoCurve, be sure to use everything to your advantage, and hopefully let's make some money tonight. Thanks, guys. Good luck.